Um, in the interim, since the early part of the year, I've reread our newest book, A Thousand Cuts, Architectures of Displacement, several times. I wanted to get a sense of its troubling argument, its structure, its feel. And that's why I want to resist the temptation to explain it to you today. Each of you can read it, of course you will. Each of you can interpret it the way you will. For me, at least, explanations tame things. They extract an argument, smooth over a provocation, and turn what is alive and restless into something you can agree or disagree with over a drink or two. Ours isn't a tame book, and I don't want to do it that disservice. What I want to offer you instead is an unsettling, by way of a few thoughts that ask you, just for a moment, I promise, to loosen your expertise and let the familiar become strange. Because that is where the force of our book lives, in the strangeness of the familiar, in the violence of the ordinary, in all those questions that have long outlived our willingness to ask them. Walls don't appear from nowhere. They arise from a peculiar dream, a dream of a self, a society, a system that thinks itself complete, contained, that knows where it ends and where the rest begins. What we so casually call the migrant crisis is, at its root, a crisis of cultural imagination. The imagination of those who build walls around what they claim as their own. Movement is a symptom of that crisis. Lack of imagination, its problem. The displaced of the world's way is the displaced are the world's way of telling us that something is deeply broken. Something in the story we keep telling ourselves about who belongs and who doesn't belong. A story growing harder to defend with more and more people showing up at more and more borders of the world. Our book asks, what does it cost a civilization to keep telling that story? The story that props up our sense of right or wrong, a story that we use to prop up our sense of how the world should turn, a story we use to prop up our sense of who we are and who they are not. In his first encyclical, titled Magnifica Humanitas, Pope Leo XIV named the treatment of migrants and refugees as the litmus test for social justice in this century. In other words, how we treat refugees and migrants is the civilizational test of our time and of the future. The Pope insinuates that we as a civilization will ultimately not be measured by our tallest towers, our most celebrated institutions, but by what we built for the ones we didn't want. And by that measure of measures, the architectures of displacement that continue to be built should give us all, as humans, as architects, serious pause. We who practice from within the comfort of our discipline like to think of architecture as innocent, as if what is built simply is, neutral, mute, waiting to be used. But architecture also embodies worldviews, arguments, and positions. It is policy made of concrete and steel. The same imagination that conceived the piazza also conceived the processing center. The same design-minded foresight that produced the library of the museum produced the deportation terminal. We don't speak of these things at our award ceremonies, and we don't pin them to our studio walls, but we know they exist. Somewhere between rendering and reality, we stopped asking whose life the space of the world is actually for. When we dress up brutal things that cut up that common space of the world in bureaucratic language, we don't diminish the brutality of those things. We make them easier to ignore as the way things should go. Things, like people, carry their histories. A barbed wire fence first coiled around cattle on the American frontier finds itself more than a century later drawn tight along the Rio Grande. A scanner engineered for the battlefield ends up reading the faces of families at so many border crossings. Tools arrive in our time and our hands already shaped by older logics, older violences. The thousand cuts of our world are made of ordinary things, and their mundaneness is precisely the point. The routine ordinariness is their power. The bureaucratic poise with which those things are deployed is the violence. And the societal comfort with all of those things that displace people is our complicity. And yet, power consistently fails to account for what it cannot capture or enclose completely. For every wall, there is already someone leaving water in the desert. For every seized rescue ship, there is a crew that goes back out to sea. For every temporary camp made permanent, there are people building something official maps refuse to name or recognize. The counter-architectures of this world aren't waiting to be built or designed. They're already here, already working. In the margins, in the makeshift, in the places power hasn't bothered to look. Now, don't get us wrong. This isn't heroism. This is hospitality at work on the ground. A hospitality born of a more rooted, more primal love that finds no meaningful distinction between self and stranger because it knows there's enough world for us all. The question this book leaves us with is neither comfortable nor resolved. It asks, where does architecture stand as medium and modus of displacement? To repeat, as I said at the beginning, walls, borders are failures of imagination. The most radical things architects can do, perhaps the most human thing any of us can do, is to take that failure of imagination seriously and unapologetically. To design the threshold in place of the wall, the bridge in place of the border. We weren't born knowing how to build walls and borders. We learned that habit of design, which means we can unlearn those habits of design as well. The same imagination that drew the first line of division could yet dare draw a world without divisions, without walls, without borders, without cuts. Just imagine.